Noting the time and the presence of a quorum, I hereby call the Acton Finance Committee November 22nd, 2022 meeting to order. And I do have public participation number 1, but for some reason I thought I had put it number 2, but that's okay. Let's go ahead with the public participation. Is anybody? Tara, come on up. Generally, we don't, but I'm also, I'm happy to play it by ear. I think that discussion in particular is on the agenda because it's a little bit of a citizen concern. So Tara, I think yes. How does that sound? Yes. No, you should wait. Okay. Anything else? All right. Wonderful. So the next item on the agenda is an update on the Minuteman High School from the brand new superintendent, Dr. Dawson, and Pam Norse, our representative to the school committee, is also here. And yes, welcome, and just press the button on the microphone and have at it. Thanks so much for coming. And sorry, are you set up to present already, or do you need help? Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. You did forward it to me, but the only thing I was thinking in my head was to have it to publish on our website for our DocuShare. So I apologize. She sent me her presentation, and I don't even know if we have a computer to share it with. Wonderful, Dave. Let me send it to you really fast. I apologize. I have a one-track mind. I'm very good at single tasking. I apologize. All I was thinking of was publishing it. Yeah, but it'll be faster just to forward it to David Willinghoff, and then he can. I apologize. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, so we'll do forward. Okay, I've just pressed send, David. Oh, okay. No worries, my fault. Yep. Well, and Christine is usually the go-to.
Yes.
Yeah. So while he's working on that, I could quickly skip ahead to a comment about the ABRSD E&D policy discussion, which if you'd like, we can probably wipe that off of the slate rather quickly while David's getting ready. So, that was a discussion we started last week, and we kept it on the agenda for this week when more members could be here because we had minimum quorum last time. Sorry, I said last week, but I mean last meeting. And I had mentioned that I would ask the school committee member that I had spoken to for more clarity on what might be a viable suggestion. And after a little bit more discussion and deliberation, it came back that it's probably a very difficult thing for us to have a policy on because of the Boxborough interaction. And that it might perhaps make more sense to offer advice on more of an ad hoc basis to the school district subcommittee. Just a little filler for you before we get into that discussion. Looks like Dave's just about ready here. Will it work?
You presumably.
Do you have it right there?
Oh, then go for it.
Wonderful. I wouldn't know what to do if I had to bring the presentation. All right, so again, welcome, Dr. Dawson and Pam Norris.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Nolde, Finance Committee members. Thank you so much for inviting us and providing us this opportunity to share with you the latest information that we have. So I just want to start that this is quite preliminary and early on in our process. So what we have available, we're sharing with you tonight, but please know that all of the information that you will be receiving later, of course, will come later. But what we do have, we're sharing, because it is quite early on in our process. And so if we just keep scrolling here. And let's go to our FY23 and FY22 budget update. Yep. Here you see our FY22 as the actual budget, and then where we are with the FY23 budget. Now the revenue, the FY 2022 Chapter 70 was slightly more than estimated. However, the Chapter 71 regional transportation reimbursement was less than budgeted. Minuteman is anticipating a higher Chapter 71 regional transportation reimbursement for fiscal year 2023 as fiscal year 22 students were fully back in school and of course riding the buses. And the last revenue item to note here was the unbudgeted miscellaneous revenue, which is made up mostly of our Medicaid revenue, approximately $82,000. Under the expenditures, the non-salary savings include the transportation, utilities, and health insurance savings, which are estimated based on a percentage at the time the budget is passed. So those were just some notables on this slide. And on the next slide here, on the FY23 operating budget on target. So FY23 approved the budget of a 4.96% increase, and we're just resharing these items that were previously included in the FY23 budget presentation, just for your review. And then if we go to the next section of the spending and service level changes, and we just wanted to include in here some of our foci for our school-wide goals, because of course everything that we do and what all of this budget is supporting is our teaching and learning, and really focusing on, you know, the students that are not where we want them to be, and really focusing on our high needs students. As you may not know, but our school is 48% of our student population are on IEPs, and 54% in total are high needs students of our 692 student population this year. And so that's why, you know, it's really important for us to know that, again, this is what is our foci and purpose, our students and our teachers and the teaching and learning. So if we go to the next slide, just as a reminder, I'm sure you're all aware of our high school CTE programs. Currently, we do offer 19 career programs and in 2 academies. One of our academies focuses on engineering, construction, and the trades, and our other academy focuses on the life sciences and the human services. We are looking to continue to build out our animal science vet assisting program that started 2 years ago. So next year will be our 3rd year, so that'll continue to grow. And then we're taking a look at how are we offering our computer sciences. Of course, we have a lot of our STEM programs, but just taking a look at, are there opportunities for us to specialize more in the computer sciences, as we know that that is such a high need in industry, but also such critical skills that our students will need for their current, present, and their future. And when we're going to the next slide, our number one FY24 budget drivers is our enrollment. While it is, again, too early to share preliminary FY24 budget numbers, you will see that our budget drivers, which are impacting the 24 budget, mainly it is the year of teacher contract negotiations, and with the state of the economy that it is, we're pretty confident that there will be a request for an increase, of course, in the COLA, cost of living expenses. And as our enrollment has been increasing, so is our need for full-time teaching staff to meet the needs of our increasing enrollment. And then health insurance, we usually do the 10% projected increase plus our FTEs, and then the 5% for the transportation, the building utilities projected for the 9% increase, and then there's OPEB, and we'll talk about some of these items a little bit more. and then debt services, new curriculum, and partnerships, because we have to keep relevant, right? And then increase in cost of CTE supplies and materials. We're really seeing the impact of inflation on our cost of materials and consumables for especially our CTE programs. When you're looking at some of the, the wiring and the equipment that's needed, the teachers are really noticing the jump in prices there. So I kind of went over the other items that we're using, doing best estimates as we are preparing our FY24 budget. And we hope to have our budget details for FY24 in December. And then, of course, right now I am in the process of reviewing all of the initial department requests that have come in. And we do understand the impact of the economy on all of us. And so just trying to be very fiscally prudent and responsible in how we are meeting the requests, but also being mindful of the impact, not just on Minuteman, but all of our towns that are supporting us. So if we go to the next slide, our capital spending plans, just an update on our athletic fields. Just a quick timeline and sustainability. We will be providing more of a breakdown for you in the future, because part of the plan for the athletic fields was the potential for revenue. And we have had an increase in the rental use of our fields and some of our other facilities. So we will have a breakdown to be able to show you the impact and the revenue that it is bringing in. So we'll be working on that for you. On the next slide, in the capital stabilization account, where we are committed to having funding the capital stabilization account through our budget each year, especially with the capacity for the building project plans. And so here you see that this account was established in 2016, our current balance you see here, and we added 500,000 this year, and then up to date, we've spent 60,000, and our capacity building projects, we are still continuing to build out our north building. And at the time of this presentation, I think it was 11. So beginning of this week, we've spent so far 108,000 to date on the north building. We got a little bit delayed on that, but we're back on track. And part of that delay was due to supply chain issues. So in a month or so, the students should be able to be finishing out the build out. And then on the next slide with the capacity building, we are increasing capacity to accommodate member town enrollment with no additional borrowing. So that's, with the north building. And just to discuss a little bit about the east building renovation, we are continuing to look at potential partnerships and what other innovative opportunities may exist for us to renovate that building so that we can use it to increase capacity for our students and classrooms. And again, but we are looking to do that so we do not have to come to towns to ask for more funding to support that project. So we're really trying to reach out to potential partners and thinking differently about what we can do and how we can do that. So let's talk about enrollment, because there is a shift in enrollment in a good way. Enrollment is shifting to all in district. As you know, historically, there have been a high percentage of our students that were from out of district. We're proud to say that this year is the first time in a long time that all of our incoming ninth graders were from our 9 town members. So we have no out of district students in grade 9. You may see that in our upper grades, especially in grade 10, we might have had a few out of district students, but the only way that that would have happened, especially according to our regional agreement, is that if there were seats open and there were no students from our member towns that were looking to enroll in those seats, only then would we offer, and we did offer a couple seats to out-of-district students who wanted to come into Minuteman. So, but what that means is that, and this was, I know, shared in previous budget presentations, because I think this is the most important slide, because with the shift in enrollment of member towns, there is corresponding decrease in non-member towns. That means, of course, that there is a decrease in out-of-district revenue. and non-resident capital fee revenue that was used to offset member assessments. And so I know that in previous years, especially last year, I know that this information has been shared with you because we knew this was going to happen. But I think this is probably the most impactful for, upcoming budget presentations, and when you see that, this is why our revenue from our out-of-district town students are decreasing, and then therefore also their non-resident capital fee revenue, which was offsetting. So that's really important for us to remember that. And so the next slide just kind of shows what's been happening, our overall enrollment.
Oopsie. My slide does not
It won't show
really
the
that.
graph, but
No.
the overall enrollment, it was just a line graph comparison of our shift over time of our non-member district enrollment. Starting back in 2011, we had approximately 335 our enrollment that were non-member, with about 430 that were member towns. And so as the non-members decreasing, our member increasing. So that was that graph that you'll see. And then the next slide, just currently where we are with enrollment. In district, you're going to see over time the increase, out of district, the decrease, and then our total enrollment, we're currently at 692. As we know, the building was built at 85% capacity for 628. So, but we're looking to maximize, and if we're to be at 100% capacity, we're looking at 720 students. And so when we're looking at that number over the 4 years, the maximum number of enrollment per class would be 180. What we've also noticed historically is that there's about 5% attrition rate. So we're increasing the incoming classes to about 189 that we're accepting, so that it'll balance out to about 720 within 4 years. So within 2 more years, we'll be at full capacity at 720. But again, we are looking to see in what additional ways can we increase that capacity to increase seat capacity overall, and especially taking a look at the East Building, because when we have such a special program that we do at Minuteman, and as a new superintendent, and I'm engaging in my entry plan and really taking the time to listen, observe, and learn with various stakeholders, I keep hearing time and time again how Minuteman is one of the premier career technical schools in the district, in the state. And so, when you keep hearing that from different stakeholders over and over, that is, you see the truth in that, especially when I'm walking into classrooms and seeing students at work and seeing, how they talk about their work, and when I'm seeing them at their successes at Future Farmers of America, FFA, and just last night, just watching them receive their awards at Skills USA, they're evidence of that, and we want to make sure that more students have access to these types of opportunities, and that's why we really appreciate the 9 town members sticking with us and supporting the challenging times, and also now celebrating the success over the years, and allowing students of Acton and families access to what Minuteman has to offer. So we really are very appreciative of that. So just specifically in our enrollment numbers in Acton, so you'll see in 2023, we had 11, and then that grew to 23, 28, and then we had a little bit of a dip in 26 to 21. And then currently, as of November 21st, we have 17 applicants from Acton, which is a little bit lower. This time last year, we had 23. But we also have not had our showcase day with Acton yet, as where most of the other, we had 7 towns we had showcased. We had to reschedule 2 of our towns, Acton being one of them, just because of scheduling conflicts with the schools. So usually there's an uptick in applications after the showcase. And what's interesting, we had open house Sunday, and we had over 300 registrants. And then I didn't get the actual count yet of those who didn't register come Sunday. So we had like hundreds of families and students, but a lot of them were younger, like, 9-year-olds. 6th and 7th grades, like really coming down. So they're really learning about us, right? And they're very interested in learning about if this is the right fit for their child much earlier. And so that's really interesting to learn that families are now seeing how competitive this is becoming. So we're really excited that Acton, gets first dibs. So we're really excited about that. But so we'll continue to provide you updates on student enrollment. And then the next slide, a little bit about our non-member tuition fees. As you can see, our out-of-district tuition is set annually by the Department of Secondary and Elementary Education. It's based on 125% of the statewide foundation budget vocational rate. And for FY23, that rate was at $19,622. Other FY23 fees from our non-member students for our special education increment was $7,100. And then the capital fee was based on the average per pupil cost of debt service, new building only. And then, of course, the transportation costs paid by the sending town, okay? All right, and then on the next slide, there's the capital fee for non-members. Our cities and towns, of course, if they have less than the 5 Chapter 74 programs, their fee is $8,920.27 per student. But if they have more than 5 of the Chapter 74 programs, it's $6,690.20 per student. And then the revenue collected offsets the debt service for the member towns. And then when we go to the next slide, if we take a look at the per pupil assessment for FY23, you'll see for Acton that between 22 and 23, there was a minimal difference. And so it's, as noted before, overall per pupil assessment, which is the total operating assessment divided by the enrollment count, will remain consistent between years FY23 and FY22. And this has decreased from FY21, and then of course FY20. There will come a time where this will level off, right? Because we will be fully enrolled by member towns. We will come to a cap of how many students will be coming from each of our towns. So we will have, where we'll hit like our peak, and it'll normalize once all the numbers kind of play out. So this isn't going to be like, hey, these costs are going to continue to increase and increase and increase. There will come a time where it'll plateau once we know our full, enrollment. Okay. So if we go to our education reform and mandates, these have no financial impact, so we didn't provide any of that for you, but we did want to provide you an update on OPEB. And here's where we are. OPEB liability, June 30th. Minuteman, we want to highlight the work done here to focus on OPEB in FY22 with the creation.
Sorry, I lost the slides.
Okay.
Look away for a moment while I find it.
It's okay.
While I scroll through.
But we wanted to highlight the work of the OPEB advisory subcommittee that was formed and worked on with Mr. Ledoux and Mr. Eichenen. Here, we want to just note that we want to, have a long-term plan funding the strategy, and the plan was submitted to the school committee in winter of 2021. And if we go to the next slide, the recommendation here is to adopt the following 6-year funding plan for budget line for the retiree insurance. This was shared previously. We just wanted to note that the schedule started with the $725,000 in FY23 with a 5% increase each year, and then an additional increase of $300,000 for the FY25. Because what'll happen is in FY23 pay-go budgeted amount of the $605,000, right? OPEB contribution will be $119,000. Oh, that's so peaceful. In the city, you don't hear this like this, so this is so nice. So we'll follow the budget recommendations for future budgets, and for FY25, there will be that $300,000 hike, but that'll be feasible because the ESCO lease will end FY '24, and then the ESCO commitment for the 9-member towns, it's about $425,000, so we will be able to add the $300,000 toward OPEB. Okay? So that's a very quick summary of where we are currently. I think a lot of it will be a review of what's been, presented to you before, and then just some new numbers. And then as soon as we get more, definite numbers, we'll be presenting that. And we'll hopefully have the next round in December for you. It will be difficult because we'll see how the teacher contract negotiations goes, and then based on when that wraps up, we won't be able to finalize the budget until that's wrapped up, of course. Okay.
Thank you so much. So before I open it to questions to the board members, how has it been, the story of you coming in and taking over? How do you feel? How has that transition worked out for you?
Yeah, the transition has been great. Especially, I've worked with a number of school committees before, and I've really appreciated the support of Minuteman School Committee. That one of the first things they did was actually put together a transition task force to just support, because I was moving from out of state and just making all of those things just go smoothly. But then, you do your homework, right, before you even apply for such a job, because I think the fit is so important. Like, what am I bringing to Minuteman, and then what do they have to offer for my growth as well? And I think it's just such a nice match, and it has been a whirlwind, but very exciting. I feel so fortunate and honored to be able to serve the families and the staff of Minuteman. They truly are special, and you kept hearing about it, but then once you get there, you start to feel it, and then you're trying to figure out, well, what about it is making it so special? And it absolutely is the staff and the students. When you see them, you know why Minuteman is special. And so it's been, I say, like, I'm nearing the end of my 5th month, but then because we've done also, I think we've done a lot.
Feels longer.
Right? And then I'm like, oh, yeah, it does feel a bit longer than 5 months, but again, then it's only going to be 5 months. But I've enjoyed every minute of it, and truly I'm so blessed to be able to help lead Minuteman.
Wonderful. I'm glad to hear it's going well. And again, thank you for coming tonight. So if you don't mind, I'll open up to questions to the committee. Let's start on this end. Mr. Majors, do you have any questions or comments?
I think you guys are doing progress. I think we're... It's that progress and I think the population of the school that it's like I think some people are sort of grumbling at the expense of it costs more to send someone to a vocational school than a traditional high school, and I don't think some people understand that concept, that it is more expensive for any number of reasons. The special education and all that. And plus the district is so large that your transportation cost is large because the towns are so diverse and spread out. It's like you're almost like a victim of your success by, with the population, with filling up the school. People, a few years ago, people were convinced that you would never get 600 people in that school ever. And from day one, you were almost fully occupied. So I think they're making tremendous strides, and it's something I know I've been involved with Minuteman for a number of years now, and something I'm proud of, that you see the results right in front of us. But if there's any way we could make it cheaper, we would, but I guess the same would apply to, Acton Boxborough Regional Schools. Schools are expensive, and people have to, get used to it. But one thing about the districts is there, at one point there was talk of maybe expanding the districts, like adding Watertown and maybe Arlington or communities like that, but I guess there's even if they wanted to join, doesn't look like there's any room for them. How would that work?
Yeah. So, yes, the school committee, we are continuing to actively look at the ramifications of adding additional towns because there have been a few towns have shown interest. So I'll kind of run down some of your points. First and foremost, what our subcommittee is looking at is the integrity of our program. We don't want to jeopardize the integrity of our program. And what we mean by that is, part of it is, when our students come, we ensure that they're getting at least one of their top 3 choices in their programs. That's really important because the kids come because of the programs. And if they're not able to get that, then they're going to stop coming. So we're taking a look at, if we have these programs and we have this enrollment, but if we increase the enrollment, what will that do to their chances of getting their top 3 choices? So that's one of the first pieces that we're looking at because we do not want to dilute that. The next piece then we're taking a look at is what will be the impact on our 9 member towns and their students who want to get in. And obviously, that means that there will be the chances of your students being on a wait list. Right now, they don't have to be on a wait list because we're able to accept them all. So there is the chance that should we add additional towns, a town or 2, that more of our member town students will be on the wait list. That's a possibility. So we're taking a look at, is there any way of trying to minimize that? Then we take a look at the East building. If we're able to build that out and, add more seat capacity, then what are the ramifications of that? And then, of course, we're taking a look at the impact on the finances. And because we do understand the challenges that our towns are having, not just for sending students to Minuteman, but just what's going on in your own districts and in your own communities, and then with the economy. So we are trying to look at this possibility. The regional agreement is very specific on what we can do, the timeline in which we can do it. So, we were really looking at how quickly we could try to have some of these decisions made. But if you don't know, we have to take this, once our school committee has reviewed all of the information, looked at all of the ramifications of it, should they decide that we should look at and we want to take it to the towns, we must take it to every town meeting and get a unanimous vote of approval before it can happen. So we don't, we want to make sure that we have our package tight with all of the information because we want our towns to make informed decisions, knowing how it will impact, first and foremost, their students and families, and then, of course, the finances. So I don't know if you have anything else.
Yeah, if I could add to that. The school committee took a vote, I think about 2 or 3 months ago, to formally ask one of our subcommittees to look into the issue of expanding the district, because we had been getting some informal inquiries about it. And as Dr. Dawson said, what we've been trying to do is to be identifying all of the issues, because we are very cognizant of the impact of the Minuteman tuition, and while we're very thrilled that we're able to be serving more students from Acton, we also understand that there is a budget impact to that as well. So, so we're looking at, so we are looking into what are the potential impacts, both in terms of doing nothing, and there's definitely an impact in terms of doing nothing, but then also in terms of adding additional towns to the district. So, all I can say is the district, the school committee is actively engaging in these conversations now. And, hopefully we'll be able to come out with a recommendation for how to move forward. And then, of course, if we do decide to increase the district and, that there's a very there's a certain process set out in the regional agreement that we need to follow in order to do that. So it's not a fast issue. I mean, even if we decided right now, it still would take, significant time before we could do that.
Mr. Willinghoff.
Yeah, thank you both for presenting to our group here. Maybe just to follow on a couple of Mike's questions is, it sounds like with the addition of member towns, et cetera, that's addressing, sort of the revenue issue. Do you have what sort of ability do you have to control costs? And I ask that knowing that, there is a lot of great folks there. There's, inflation, as everybody's aware. As you pointed out, material supplies have been going up. If you take a step back and you do think about the numbers, how do you, ignoring the revenue line, like what sort of levers do you have to just, move the cost structure around of the organization? And it's maybe an unfair question. I asked mainly from the perspective of, to your point, adding additional member towns could present wait lists. And I don't know how it would work, I'm curious, but lotteries or how students would be selected from individual towns. But there is that trade-off of non-member towns leaving now. And obviously the cost is going to stay the same, essentially. That's correct, right? If you're trading off a non-member town student for a member town student, the costs all else are equal, right? Do I understand that the right way, or did I explain that, ask that question well?
It costs more to be a member town sending a student than an out-of-district town sending a student. And that's, I think, part of the reason, I'm sorry?
Yes.
Yes.
We understand.
And I think that's also why I think part of the regional agreement was changing that, right? And because I think it wasn't fair that member towns were paying what they were paying, but those who weren't member towns could send their kids for a lot less. And so that was, I think, part of why we said, no more out-of-district students. Mm-hmm. And if they want to come, they need to join and then pay like everybody else is paying.
Sounds great.
Is my understanding, in my listening and learning, that's what I've learned.
No, that sounds great. And, I'll second Mike's point on just the enrollment growth is when we initially talked about the Minuteman, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was the trend. Your slide, by the way, the enrollment slide presents well in the PDF. It's the PowerPoint, I think, on that device. But it does show that troughing at that level and then growing from that point on. I did want to ask just about the capacity, and if you could just correct me if I misunderstood, but I think you said 720 is the current capacity max, and the students, you generally operate at sort of 85% capacity. But then you also talked about, the enrollment growth over the next 2 years, and I think you thought in 2 years from now you would be at 100%. Can you talk just about maybe the east building and the north building? Is what options, like how much capacity would those two projects add? Yeah. And forgive me for not knowing all the details about the capital plan at the school, but those are the ones that were listed in your presentation. Are there other ones following that? I mean, how do you think about just capital planning, I guess is the first question.
So the north outbuilding was added on as part of the new building towards the end, and not so much for adding additional seat capacity, but when in our advanced manufacturing, welding, metal fabric, in that program area, there are some big equipment and noisy equipment. And so the north outbuilding will allow us to move some of those pieces of equipment to that building, allowing for more space and better utilization of the current space. So that was done as part of the, when the new building was built. Now the east building is a separate piece, and it has been used previously. I know that there was a school that was run out of there before. We had our own childcare program that had been there before. And then it was very, very useful during the pandemic when we had to, have all of the spacing of our students. We were able to hold some programs there. When we were looking at the potential of expanding into that space for increasing seating capacity, we're looking at least another 4 classrooms spaces. So we're taking a look at another maybe 80 kids that could hold in that building. So that's how we're kind of saying the 800 number, so that we could go from 720 to 800. That's been the conversation so far. The difficulty for us is that we're pretty much landlocked with conservation land, and so we're limited to being able to do any more building out. So we're just trying to maximize, what we do have, and just trying to think creatively how we can get that funded. So, because while there was funding set aside in a plan for the north out, the east building is totally a separate and new, initiative that we're starting.
And if I could add,
Yes,
and
please.
correct me
And
if
remember,
I'm wrong
I'm
here,
only
but
5
my
residents.
understanding also is right now, one of the biggest limiting factors in terms of student enrollment is not the shop so much, but classroom space. And the east building would allow for that additional classroom space. True. And that when we talk about the north building, it's basically, as Dr. Dawson said, it's right adjacent, and it would just be an extension for the advanced manufacturing, welding, which are very popular, programs, to be able to have more options there and just, a little more breathing space in that room. But it's, in terms of the enrollment, it's the classroom space that's real critical. And when we talk about north building, the east building is the one that would give that. And again, as we think about adding towns to the district, it's all part of a puzzle. So, if we're able to expand the enrollment, it makes a lot more sense to be bringing in more towns again, so that we're then not relying on current member towns as well.
Gotcha. Great, thank you.
Great. So before I pass it down the line, I just want to highlight one point that came out in your presentation and in this Q&A, which I think I wasn't aware of previously, which was that for those non-member towns, you don't get to set the rate. The state is setting the rate, which is extremely frustrating. So, sorry, I just wanted to highlight that point. Ms. Anderson.
Thank you. Could you please go to the slide with the assessment that said what the per pupil assessment is? My understanding is that there's some amount that we pay as a capital assessment, and then there's something different, maybe it's tuition. Could you go through what that per pupil assessment is made from?
I just had this conversation with my business manager. This is strictly based on our operating.
Okay, so we have a capital assessment on top of that.
Yes.
Does that change with enrollment, the capital assessment?
Yes, because
So more people, we pay a larger share.
Yes.
Has all of the borrowing happened for that? Or is that going to be, the whole capital going to be increased?
Has all the borrowing?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe, yes.
Okay, so we're all set. So that,
Yes,
we just get whatever share based on
Yes.
our students. So that's not also going to jump up incrementally. We
Yeah.
are looking at a few years, we've been told to project
yes.
large increases. My understanding is part of that is because we are rolling into a period, we had low enrollment from the town, and it's now averaging into the period where we have what hopefully is a relatively stable.
So it'll
Enrollment.
probably stabilize in the next 2 years or so.
Okay.
So it's
Which I
coming.
think is what the estimates we got from Dr. Buckley
Correct.
were. Because I think we were told to expect somewhere in the 30s for the coming year. When you start having 30% increases, people get nervous.
Yeah.
Even if it's 30% of not a very large number in general comparison. So I think you just addressed one of my concerns, Pam, is that the enrollment ability for the town might exceed what we can afford. But it sounds like you're looking at maybe trying to figure out a way to sort of maintain that, because I think it's an incredible program. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for our students who are not as academically focused.
So I do want to stop right there.
Yeah.
Because guess what? All of our kids are highly academically focused. I think, but the way that they are able to show their academic success is different.
I'm going to challenge you there. I
Yeah.
don't think academics has anything to do with intelligence. I come from a family with a lot of tradespeople. My father is a carpenter. Believe me, I am considering a second career as a plumber.
Yes.
I wholeheartedly think that
Yeah.
there is I would say, overly intellectual bent to our school. And everyone has done the most they can to try to minimize it, but there are a lot of very driven kids there
Yes.
where if you don't fit into that mold,
Yes.
or you just don't want to go off to college,
Yes.
I think this is a wonderful alternate path. I by no means.
Yeah. And I guess, I say that because there's such a perspective out there that our career technical education isn't as academically challenging or, than your more traditional. And so we're just trying to say, no, that's not necessarily true. Intelligence and vocabulary, semantics, right? But what our kids get at Minuteman, may it be in career tech or the more traditional path, it's just both are just as academically challenging.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and so I just wanted to.
No,
because-
my dad's a carpenter.
Yeah.
I've grown up
And you know how. and
with
you-
all this, the physics and everything he needs to
Exactly,
understand.
right? Yeah.
Way beyond a lot of people.
Yeah. It's just that what we have to contend with are the stereotypes that some of our community members are of the old school mentality that, vocational is for those kids who aren't this or who aren't that, in a negative way. And so we're always fighting that to say, no, actually that's old school, that's not now. And so we're trying to get away from that stigma. So that's why I
Yes, no.
but I know what you mean,
I
so
apologize
thank you
for
that. Yeah.
saying it the wrong way. That is not at all
Yeah.
how I intended it. I think it's wonderful to have as an opportunity for people who are on a different path.
Yes. Yes.
Or just think about the world in
Yeah.
a different way. So thank you. for
And that is why we really appreciate our 9-member towns, and we understand that it does cost, more, but the fact that you're giving kids who need a different path, the access to that, I think it's huge, right? Because when they don't, look what happens to those who don't have that access, and what price do you put on the loss, right? When people don't get that access. So the fact that our towns are willing to, support our kids and their families to say, no, you know what? If this is a better fit for you, we support you in that. We just commend you for, your commitment to the education of all of our students. And, that's what we're also trying to do is, are we making sure that Minuteman is accessible to all of our students in all of our member towns? May it be based on their, academic needs, may it be based on, their racial background or, their sexual background. We just want to make sure that we're giving access to everyone who deserves it.
Thank you. If you could just keep us in the loop on how to not worry that our enrollment is going to skyrocket beyond what we can afford, that would be
Absolutely.
extremely valuable.
Can I just add to that? And of course, we no guarantees that we don't know what's happening, but when we look at the trend right now for the enrollment for Acton, we had a very sharp increase. And then it looks like it's starting to level out, and right now, just hypothesis is that it's going to go from that high, won't be as low as it was, but it's going to come to a leveling. So that's what we'll be looking at.
Well, I know a number of kids from my daughter's class went to visit the school day and came back wanting to go. So you might just have not gotten the applications yet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So once again, before I move it down the line, this is a good place to interject a question from another one of our members who couldn't be here tonight, which I think sent to you by email as well, which is, the question was, is there a way for towns to limit their own enrollment?
For towns to, that's a good question.
I can give you what I understand from being on the enrollment committee for a while and just what I know of the regional agreement. And I think we really do have to get back to you about that, but I think right now there's not a mechanism to do that in our admission policies. I think that's, as I said, we're looking in that school committee, subcommittee at a number of different issues, such as, adding other towns, looking at enrollment issues. And that might be something that we add to the list, but I think right now there's not a mechanism in the admissions policy for that to happen.
I didn't think so, yeah.
Great, thank you. Mr. Borden?
So I got two questions. One of them's on this slide, and I'll ask that in a second. What is ESCO lease?
Yes, on this slide?
No, it wasn't on the
No,
site.
it's on the
It was on the
last.
OPEB. It was the ESCO lease is going away. I don't know what ESCO lease.
And I don't know if Mr. Majors would be better able to help with that one. The
ESCO, ESCO, was it something about ESCO lease is going away? A lease of some sort? I don't know what ESCO is.
I'm trying to remember.
I've never heard that.
I don't think.
Oh,
no,
that
no,
might.
that's not-
No.
No, this is in terms of OPEB.
Right. We will get that information back to you. That was something that was before my time on the school committee, and I don't feel like I know it enough to explain it, but we'll
enough.
get that back.
The other one is I'm looking at the slide in front of us, and I see Concord, Dover, two very wealthy communities, more so than Acton, and their per pupil cost assessment is going down. And I mean, is it strictly based on enrollment? I would think that you'd say, hey, the town, the school, the budget is X, and we have X number of students. You take that to divide it by the number of students, and you get per pupil cost, and Acton sends this number, this is your cost. So that per pupil cost would be the same, but your assessment may be different based on the number of students.
So, yes, and I'm trying to I'm replaying my meeting when I was learning about all this. So this would be the total, based on the total operating assessment, but the way that the capital fees assessment is calculated is different, even though it's based on enrollment. I want to say that there's a portion that everyone pays regardless of enrollment. And then, based on enrollment, it would go up. Because everyone has a percent of that cost, being a member town. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, again, we'll get back to you with that, because, and it is interesting that in looking at this, you can see the communities that have the smaller enrollments are the ones where you see that going down. So let's,
Yeah.
let's figure that out and
Definitely
get back.
get more of an explanation.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
And welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Cole?
As you probably may have guessed, I have a ton of questions. I hope Pam warned you that I'm the town malcontent. And so welcome, Dr. Lawson. I do have a reputation for being acerbic. I apologize in advance. I'm just asking a ton of questions, and please don't take any of it personally.
And I will write them all down.
I don't know how to
Whatever I
ask-
can't answer, we'll get back to you. How's it?
Definitely seem to have an issue with how I phrase my questions. My first question is, there have been multiple different debt borrowings since 2017. There have been at least 6. How many of them were debt excluded and how many of them are not? And then the corollary question to that is, when we get an assessment from Minuteman, the debt exclusion or the capital costs are rolled into it directly and are not part of a excluded debt. They're not part of a capital exclusion, correct? So therefore, everything that comes from Minuteman, whether it be operating or capital, actually hits Acton's Prop 2.5 limits. So you're taking not only are you taking a larger amount when it comes to sorry, let me rephrase. With increased enrollment, I fully expect the operational costs to increase. I also understand that the capital costs increase as well. But normally, you would be able to exclude some of that as a debt exclusion, especially when you take out a large bond on a new building. For example, the new building that we just built, the Boardwalk campus, a fair chunk of that, the money paid to service that debt is outside of our Prop 2.5 limits. I don't think any of it is on the Minuteman side. And that's going to, or the very initial first borrowing was debt excluded. I don't believe any of the rest of them have been. Is that accurate?
I don't know the answer to
Yeah,
that.
that one I don't know.
Okay, so every time you take out a bond that is not debt excluded, you're squeezing our ability to meet our Prop 2.5 budget at a disproportionate level compared to any of the other capital projects that the town has to take on. So I do remember that the first bond was a debt exclusion, those capital override, the whole 9 yards. All the rest of these bonds are not. I'm glad to hear that you have no current plans for any new bonds. Please keep it that way. I also remember that the initial max capacity of the school was 628 in your original press release, but that was a soft number, and the number that you were advertising to us was 660. You've already blown right past that. The reason you blew past that is because so many different towns left the district. If you'd had a larger district, you would have been able to lobby for a much larger building with the MSBA. Because the towns left, we ended up building the absolute smallest building that the MSBA would allow. That is what was reported to us by our liaison at the time, that we could not build it any smaller, and this is as small as they'd go. Is that how you remember it?
That's not my recollection, and I'll tell you my recollection, and if it's okay to ask Mike to
Please do.
weigh in
We're
as well,
all trying to get
because
information here, yes.
Is that, in fact, the towns that have remained a part of the district wanted a much larger district.
Yes.
But it was the towns that were leaving that were lobbying very, very strongly for a small district.
Agreed.
And it was, in fact, an agreement that we would build a smaller district that, it was a compromise that they then agreed to support it so we could move ahead with the building. It wasn't because they were leaving, but
And then they left
they were
anyway.
wielding a lot of power there.
And then they left anyway.
And then they left anyways.
So we are stuck with a small building that should have been much larger, and we should have been able to leverage the MSBA. As a result, we have not been able to leverage the MSBA. And all subsequent borrowings that have not been under the auspices of MSBA have been fully funded on the backs of the towns that remained. This is not fair. This is not fair. So when you think about letting other towns back in, the answer is hell no. They weren't there when it was time to pay their dues. It is absolutely inappropriate of the state to allow them to send their students into our district at a cheaper rate than the people that stayed in the district as a result of the capital expenditure. So that's not tolerable either, which leads me to my first actionable question that I would love an answer on. I don't expect it tonight. What lobbying are you doing to the Commonwealth to make this fair? We did right by the Commonwealth by staying in this district, and we are getting disproportionately punished for doing the right thing. What are you actively doing to lobby the Commonwealth to make this right? Follow-up question. The North Building was not part of the MSBA. The North Building expansion was not part of the MSBA. Again, that's coming completely out of our backs. I believe just Just to reiterate my questions I got on the sheet here, I believe there have been 6 borrowings. I could be wrong on that. I could have missed one. I believe only one of them was an excluded debt. How many others
We'll
have there been?
we'll look into that again.
I think we've still got room for 2 more.
Still have room for 2 more what?
I mean, I think they're authorized.
Are there 2 more? So that's a wonderful question. Are there any upcoming debt? Are there any upcoming borrowings?
So, again, I may be wrong, but I thought with the last borrowing, that
Yeah.
was the last.
I don't think they need it anymore, but I think they're
Yeah.
authorized if they need it.
Oh, okay. A preemptive authorization, but not an actual ask? Okay. Please don't. I see that, I do see that you have a plan to increase your OPEB funding to limit your liability. You may have mentioned it. I was actively trying to look up a couple of numbers on my phone when you were going through those 2 slides. I apologize if you did mention it. What year do you anticipate being fully funded on your OPEB liability, or do you need to go through the committee to the subcommittee to find that out?
So the recommendation was to adopt the following 6-year funding plan. And so on here, it has by FY 2028 that we would be funded to the 1.275.
And is that fully, that's one point, what's your current OPEB liability? Only 20 million?
If you go one slide.
Like I said, I missed it. I was actively trying to look up how much we,
20,850,000.
and so your balance in 6 years, is going to be only 1.275? Or that, no, they're planning on putting in 1.275 that year. So what's their balance going to be at the end of the 5-year period? About 50% of their total liability?
I will get back to you on that.
So, yes, what year do you anticipate being having fully funded the liability? Those are the end of my questions. I would just like to say, I'm all for having a vocational school. I fully understand and appreciate that it is a more expensive educational path than the ABRSD. I have no problem with that. It's a different animal. It has a different cost structure. I get it. But we got screwed when the other towns left the district. And we are holding the bag for this brand new building, which was not built at the right size because it was done as a compromise to try and be nice to people who were leaving anyway. Do not build anymore. You had your chance to build with the MSBA. Please don't keep expanding this, because all you're doing is expanding the amount of money that comes out of our taxes that we have a 1/9 say in. As good as Pam is for advocating on our behalf, she's only 1/9 of the votes. And the other thing is, all this capital expansion is being done inside our Prop 2.5 limits, which is killing us. You're at $3 million plus this year in your assessment to us, which is 10 times what it was 6 years ago. And it's all coming out of Prop 2.5, which is squeezing every other entity in town. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We have a very rare occurrence here this evening with the Finance Committee, which is that we have quite a large audience, which is unusual. I'm going to ask for a show of hands in the audience if anybody has specific questions that they want to give to Dr. Dawson or Pam Norris. Okay, just wanted to check that before we moved on to see if I wanted to. We can do the comments after because, well, unless they need to hear it.
Related to me?
I'll leave it up to you. Would you like to
I mean,
take
if
a
it's
comment
related
from
to
the
me,
public?
yeah, makes sense, right?
Can you, Tara, microphone.
Tara, come on up. State your name, your address, your social security number? No.
This is Tara from Mass. Actually, the law states that you have to be able to find me, and I'm not that hard to find. So I'm just going to say that we have lots of academic people around here, and if we had more and we invested more in people who are more practical, we might all be better off. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the only other last question that I came up with, which I know you already expounded on, if there is a decision later to take new members into the district, it's a lot of equations and working out how that would be. My only question or comment would be, I sure hope that it's not going to be up to the state to decide how much we can charge them if and when they come in, so that hopefully they could get their equivalent fair share of all the costs that the rest of the towns have put in.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes,
Yeah.
they would.
I assume you're all thinking the same thing. And on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for coming and presenting and answering questions, and you're welcome back anytime. And please keep us abreast as well of when the meetings are. I know Mike goes. I wouldn't mind knowing when meetings are. If I'm available, I'd love to come and sit in on one as well.
The school committee meetings?
Yeah, for the Minuteman.
We'll do that, and we have a lot of information we're going to get back to you about, and after we do so, if you decide you'd like to have us come back, we could do so, and probably even with our business manager, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Probably sometime in the spring after you've got, it sounded like December, January numbers are more finite. It might make sense to try to schedule something at the same time when you're doing it for other towns. I assume you'll be out doing the show. Mr. Cole, did you have another question?
Try and come at least 4 weeks before annual town meeting.
Yeah, which is helpful, which is usually in June, I believe, now that we're back. Are we back on a June schedule? Oh, we're back on May schedule, sorry. It went to June. Okay, got it. Okay, so thanks again so much.
No, thank you. And if you have not had a chance to come to the school and visit, you're more than welcome to. Please just let me know and we'll make sure we make that happen.
Thank you.
And we, I know I have team members working on scheduling a town meeting for parents sometime
Okay.
before, Christmas break, holiday. So that'll be coming up. Just to meet all the families here at Acton.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just turn the microphone off.
Thank you.
Oh, and could you turn that one off as well? Thank you so much. Okay. So the next item on our agenda is the sewer bylaw and ARPA funding discussion that we started last meeting when we were a little bit short in attendance, and we decided to bring it back again when we had more members so we could have a little bit more thorough discussion. This is, again, an item which comes about a little bit as a citizen concern regarding the sewer bylaw and the fact that all the costs associated with designing, building, implementing the sewer system are supposed to be borne by the sewer users and sewer users only, and there's a question of whether, using ARPA money to fund that is really taking ARPA money away from the rest of the town, and whether that should be funded by the sewer users. So I'm happy to take any comments. I'm happy to let people chime in whether they want to reconsider our vote on the ARPA spending or not reconsider that vote. And then I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think I see two people in the audience who may have sent emails to me. Is that correct, about sewer? No. Because I don't know people by name or face, but at any rate, that was a subject too that I received this week, an email about sewer use and how it relates to water availability. And this is another topic that we'll have to, I think, bring up as well and decide whether we as a FinCom want to analyze the financial impact of these things. So it's a little bit up in the air at the moment. So on the subject of the sewer bylaws, the ARPA funding, does anybody have any comments they would like to make? Go ahead, Mr. Borden.
Where does our vote currently stand that we had it?
We had recommended to the select board to spend $500,000 for the design phase of the new, and Mr. Martin can help me with the acronyms. It was the new capacity build out at the plant. Is that right? Sorry, Mr. Martin.
And a study to determine how we might supply wastewater treatment to Great Road.
Right.
Say that again? You didn't respond on that?
I recall if there was a vote or not a vote, I remember the FinCom was not in support of spending money to expand the sewer to Great Road, but we did vote to recommend that the select board spend $500 of the ARPA money on the expansion portion of the project down at Adams Street.
Right, but not to start the study of the Great Road side.
That is my recollection.
Okay, I want to make that very clear, because I absolutely would not have voted to support
Right.
investigating.
Yeah.
2A. I believe we've said numerous times now in the last couple of years that we'd much prefer there be a back-of-the-napkin presentation on what the costs would be prior to doing any large-scale investment in a exploratory plan. Is that still the sense of the committee? May I ask that?
Can I get a show of hands, whether, re-ask the question, just to make sure we're clear?
Okay. I believe that we have said as a committee that before any large sums of money go into an exploratory study, that a very high-level, back-of-the-napkin assessment of what the costs to the parcel owners would be before we start getting to 50% designs or even 25% designs. Like when we went to the West Acton one, which got voted down 2 years ago. Okay. They invested a lot of money on that, on designs, and got well down the path only to get voted down. I believe what we have said is that we wanted a higher level, much more cursory study. Study's the wrong word. Preliminary plan in advance before we ever invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in any projects. Is that still the sense of the committee?
I don't recall the discussion, but I think it generally makes sense in any case.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in that sense, the $500,000 that I believe we recommended was specifically to take care of a plant that was already in place, and to deal with the changes that they have to do for general upkeep and potential expansion of new something or others at the existing South Acton site. It had nothing to do with investigating 2A, Great Road.
Correct. I agree that it didn't have anything to do with any expansion for 2A, but I seem to recall that it is for design and investigation into design for the expansion of the rapid basin info. Thank you. Well put. And we had voted that out of the ARPA funds based on the fact that it was a project that didn't really have funding anyplace else. But of course, what the citizen concern is that, well, it does have funding someplace else, and that's the users of the sewer system. And the request was just made whether we should reconsider that. And I'm, certainly happy to bring that up. So.
I don't need to reconsider it, but I need to make it very clear to the select board that this is not any kind of support for investigating adding sewers down Great Road.
Got it. Okay. Mr. Willinghoff.
Yeah, I just want to be clear about the ARPA funding. I mean, this money is to be spent at the discretion of the select board. This is not town meeting. We're not making formal recommendations per warrant articles. We're just simply giving them a sense of the group's view, and they think they have it. I mean, if there's pushback from folks, it's the select board who is at, to decide on how these funds are allocated. Is there any misunderstanding about that?
Nope.
Okay.
Mr. Majors?
I think the issue with sewers on 2A is basically the economic survival of 2A and the businesses that are on 2A. There's, there's restaurants that can't have seating. There's the optical shop has a very expensive grinder for lenses, and he can't use it because he doesn't have water.
Yeah, and so just so we don't get too far sidetracked, I don't think the discussion that I was proposing was really about the 2A corridor, so.
Well, the sewer, for
Before you get
ARPA
too
was
far down
was headed in that direction.
There was no intention to connect the 2A sewer to the South Acton sewer plant.
Mr. Martin?
My mistake, this $500,000 was for the, in designing an extra rib at the South Acton plant.
South Acton.
Right, and that was my recollection. Yep.
South Acton.
Yeah. Okay. Other comments from the committee? Ms. Anderson?
I appreciate the citizens' concern. Given that town council has said, I can't second guess town council on this. I have seen wonderful letters from both Ms. Friedrichs and Ms. Nichols discussing this. Any information shown to me is not anything I'm going to be capable of using to overturn my opinion of what town council has advised the town. That said, I do wonder, we're being told by the state that we need to increase multifamily housing in that area, in the area that is served. Is that correct, Mr. Martin? It would be in the same area that is served by the sewer district. I would have to believe that if we are doing that by rights, we are likely, given the clay nature of the soil, we are likely to run into problems with being able to actually have people put in multi-unit buildings there. This is where it becomes important because we would no longer qualify for a fair amount of money for the state, which does become an issue for the finances of the entire town.
Mr. Martin?
So we're being told by the state that we have to rezone an area within a half mile of the train station. I'll put an asterisk on that. There are reasons that you can zone other places if you have transportation and other things, and the final regulations are still in progress. But we have to rezone some area of town, probably in South Acton, to be able to have dense multifamily housing.
And would that, if it was within the area of that half mile, if it was mostly around the train tracks, how much of that area is currently covered by the sewer system?
Very roughly half.
Okay. Because it really does then become an issue of, if we tell people they can build multifamilies by right, and then they cannot literally because that they don't pass a perk test for the number of units we put there, do we run into an issue with the state around this program?
Good question.
I don't know the answer to that question in particular. There are similar things that you can't, for example, zone wetlands for high-density housing, which is just malicious zoning that you can't build there. So that's not allowed. This particular case, though, I don't know.
Okay. That for me is where, beyond the question of legality, that's where it becomes, for me, a question of should we be changing our opinion, but it's a complex.
Microphone. Yeah, so at this point, I'll go ahead and take public comment on
Okay,
this
so-
because I had said we would take, so go ahead, Tara.
Thank you. So, first of all, we don't have to rezone. The housing choice grants that have been given to the town were all for developers. So it's blood money. It's not money that we need. There's 5 empty housing units for every homeless person in Massachusetts and over 60 across the country. It's not a matter of quantity that's going to help the housing crisis. It's pricing. And we proposed the rehab. There's lots of other ways to satisfy the housing crisis. The state, of course, wants you to increase housing because why? They get more taxes and then you get the costs. So the state need for housing isn't something that's a real quote-unquote need either in society. It's the need for new tax revenue with the state. So please be careful about saying that the state is mandating. They're mandating if you're going to continue to get the housing choice grants, which frankly I don't think we want anyways. But Now I want to get to, can I get to my speech that I was going to give anyway? So, yes, exactly. So the sewers and the ARPAs, even if you can spend, even if the town lawyer says that you can spend it, please look at what the intent was when we approved the comprehensive water resources plan. It's right here. You've got that, and I just handed it to you. The approval is very specific, and the proponents of the CWRMP, which had the sewer expansion plans, we need to do this, need to do that, promised that by accepting this plan, the town meeting was not accepting any mandate to increase capacity, increase the sewers, et cetera. In fact, they were so confident that they were not trying to get approval for that, that they stipulated in, we asked for an amendment, and you turn it over on the other side. I'll just read it. An affirmative vote by a future town meeting shall be required to appropriate funds, borrow funds, issue any bonds, or otherwise raise any funds necessary to implement any recommended actions contained in this report, which included the RIB expansion. Please don't fall prey to a few people who really want to build housing, lots of housing, that is not even affordable by the people that are going to get mass gentrified out of 68 Parker. 76 families who aren't going to be able to afford what is being planned down there. They gave $1 million or something like that to the developer to have free sewer hookup, 76 housing units of sewer capacity for a gentrification plan that 76 families aren't going to be able to afford. There is no good planning in this town. Somewhere, somebody's got to take a stand about doing appropriate planning. The sewer commissioners, so bestowed on the title and so bestowed with votes to be able to spend money like crazy when ARPA money comes in, they spend like 2 minutes on sewer finances. Everything else is done downstairs in enclosed rooms. We don't get the information until it's already too late. If you're going to give away capacity, spend money to make capacity so they can just give away sewer hookups by a majority vote of the select board and get in the same situation 10 years from now, where we don't have enough capacity to give to the people who already bought it. The cheapest way is to give their money back than it is to start down the Ponzi scheme of building even more capacity that we have to fill up. Anyway, if this housing that was the so-called housing choice, look it up. Look up housing choice. I'll send you links of housing activists that think this is a total scam, because it's not affordable to people. You can't build enough in a high demand market to make prices go down. The San Francisco study, all these studies have shown that it's impossible to build enough in a high demand market like Acton around the Boston area so that prices will go down. Developers have laughed at that concept. They've told us that they have sophisticated models to make sure they don't overbuild so the prices go down, because they don't want their assets to go down. And yet there are people who just think you just keep building and building and magically something will happen. Well, I think that's the kind of crappy planning that Jason was referring to with anyways. I don't want to say much more, but please be careful with what you hear. And if you hear that the state is mandating, I will show you the law. Okay, ask them what housing choice awards we've actually gotten and see how many of them actually help with the general budget and how many of them were just to help some developer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Are there any other members of the public that have a comment on the sewer and the ARPA
Last thing is
discussion?
I'd rather spend it on water infrastructure to take care of the PFAS situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Okay. Any more comment or discussion from the Finance Committee? I think we've come to the same conclusion we came to last meeting when we had fewer members, which was that there doesn't seem to be momentum to try to overturn what we've already decided. And so with that, I think I'll let it go for the moment. So moving on to the next item of business on our agenda. Oh, pardon me? Yeah, I can back up for a moment.
I know I've watched a planning board meeting and that you have attended many of them. My understanding from one of the meetings is that we are facing there not being enough capacity based on on building in the sewer area. That with the capacity that has been promised to houses that are already there that are paying betterments, and then new development going in, or the developability of those plots, that we're actually getting close to capacity on what is, can actually be done there. I don't want to ignore this without understanding the broader implications.
Yeah, and I echo that sentiment in that we've had a number of citizen concerns and other committee member concerns, essentially asking or reaching out to the Finance Committee as to whether or not we can or could or should assess more to do with the capacity of the sewer system, how that relates to the capacity of our water system, and then what the financial impacts of those might be. And I think what I might do with regard to the a more specific question that was sent to me from another committee member about those topics specifically is maybe just forward those comments to you after this meeting, and then we can discuss it at another time. Go ahead, Jason.
I just want to make sure that we do a proper separation of the conversation between the South Acton expansion or the South Acton RIB and the concept of whether or not we wish to meet the new requirements from the MSBA building, because I believe that was somewhat mashed together in the comments from Ms. Fredericks. I believe we all got the poll about how do we want to see South Acton revitalized, and your name is on the masthead as being part of the working group. So I do want to reiterate what was said at a previous meeting. I think before we commit to meeting these requirements, we need a cold, hard, analytic look at exactly what the numbers are. What's at risk if we don't meet the requirements? And I think, honestly, before we go into asking the public, what do you want to see in the building side, we should start with what the actual risk is. So when you're in that working group, Mr. Nolde, please have them start with that analysis rather than immediately jump to, well, if we meet this, given that we're going to meet this, what do we need? I think it's more important that you start with do we need to meet this requirement? And I have not seen that analysis yet. And I would like to reiterate that I think that is something that we should have first, long before we start actually talking about what expansions need to be done, what water resources are required if we do, and what type of housing we're going to have if we decide to meet this. So I thought I made that clear last time. I'm just going to put a finer point on it now. I think you understand what I'm asking for. I think you heard it last time.
Yes.
But can you please make sure to advocate for that in the working group?
Well, so, and in the same vein that people are reaching out to the FinCom saying, can you do some analysis on the costs of these things?
And I'm happy to do the analysis. I just need to know how many grants we've done. How many grants have we gotten in the last 10 years? How many are we applying for?
Yeah, this is my point. Who's going to do it if it's not us, right?
Okay.
That's the sense I get. Yeah. So somebody on this committee will have to step up and start.
I'll work with you, but you put your name on that subcommittee, so that's
Yeah,
on you.
It makes sense for.
I'll gladly help with it. Do you need a vote from the committee to request the data from the town manager?
I don't know why we would.
Okay. Well, I think you make the request. If you don't get it in 3 weeks, then you get a vote from us, and then we air it out publicly if we don't get it after that.
Okay. So is it the sense of the rest of the Finance Committee as well as Jason that we should be stepping up and doing some due diligence with regard to cost-benefit analysis and financial cost-benefit analysis of not only the sewer system, but also the MBTA housing initiative.
Well, I think it belongs to the local experts that do that for a living. I don't know how we would do a cost-benefit analysis for something conceptual like that we're really not experienced in doing.
It won't be easy.
Obviously.
And there's not, I think, a simple roadmap either. But at least answering some cursory questions at least gets
Well, to use the
ball
term
rolling.
Jason used, the back of an envelope type analysis is probably still more than what we have been doing.
correct. Okay. Great. Sounds good. Okay. So with that, shall we move on to the next item on the agenda, which I had on as the ABRSD E&D Policy discussion, which again was a carryover, and I noticed that we have a school committee member and Mr. Light in the audience tonight. I'm sure they're waiting with bated breath to hear what we have to say about this. So, as I started to say while we were waiting to get the slide going, in a little bit more discussion, a little bit more thoughtful question and reply with the school committee member that I originally got the suggestion from, that perhaps we should have a voted E&D policy that we then recommend to the school district. It came out that it's, perhaps not necessary, difficult to implement, difficult to ask the district or the school committee to follow something that also affects another town, and try to get buy-in on that side. So at this point, I think I'm ready to lay the topic to bed, but because there are members here tonight that weren't here at the previous meeting, if anybody has comments on that, please feel free to share.
Given that our job is to provide financial advice that affects both towns, I have no concern about having a policy that would also affect Boxborough and that we could discuss with them. And both, policy makes it sound like we have control. A recommendation.
Right.
And we can make a recommendation and they can make a different one, and no one really has to listen to us about either. My understanding, though, is that the E&D has state requirements, that it cannot go above 5%, and I can't remember what the floor is. So
And it has no floor.
has no floor. So we would be discussing, what do we think is a safe floor?
Correct.
I don't know.
Mr. Cole?
I think it's perfectly within our purview to recommend that they try and stick to a 3% floor. But we also understand that we are back, it's at some level we're backstopping them because we're trying to keep a 3% floor for the entirety of the total budget.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say we'd like to recommend that they keep a 3% floor. If they go below the floor, we have every right to tisk them over it. We're not going to be able to enforce it too heavily, other than as the two representatives at ALG. And I would say that we probably want to make sure that we hear from them if they're going to violate the floor in any given year. What's the remediation plan? How do they plan on getting better? I don't think we can enforce this because Boxborough has a say in it as well. I also don't think that we as the overall arching town side should allow our floor to float away, because that's okay. We have to trust that they'll keep it at 3% in school. I don't trust anyone. So no, I don't recommend going that route either. So I think we're well within our rights to say we recommend a 3% floor, but if something happens, we understand. Explain to us why you're below the floor. Explain to us what your plan is to get better. And one of the answers might be, this was an unforeseen one-time thing. We'll take it out of the next couple of years' budget. We'll get back above 3%. Another answer might be that there's no way in hell we're going to get past this. This is the opening salvo on a 5-year march to an override. And if that's the case, if that's what they're going to declare, then at least that gives us as many years' notice as possible that something that we have to deal with is coming down the road.
Well, and an interesting suggestion that came out last meeting, and I think it was Mr. Noon who said it, is a 3% floor maybe isn't necessary. You know, it might be overkill for what an emergency amount of funding might need to be for this school district. Maybe something more like 1% is in line. And then, of course, there's always the moving target suggestion of, well, is this a year when we need to go out and do borrowing? So in that case, so that was where I think some of more of the ad hoc type comments, well, you know, it's maybe more useful to do ad hoc recommendations based on the circumstances rather than just having a patented, here's the number and don't exceed this or you know, go below.
I stand behind my statement that I've said multiple times. You only need an excellent credit rating before you buy something.
Yeah.
So if it's the year after they buy something big and it has to go down below, so be it.
Right, which was why, you know, either maybe having a floor recommendation is a moot point, or maybe it should be a number not 3%, like maybe 1% or whatever. Go ahead, Mr. Borden.
A couple of years back, the district was in trouble with the credit rating agencies because they didn't have enough in E&D, right? And they've substantially turned that around, as we've seen, and we're building a new school, or we built a new school, which took a lot of work, and did a good credit rating. I just don't want to see them get into a situation again with the credit agencies at any time that you don't have enough in E&D. So, I don't know if the 3% floor is overkill or sufficient, right? You know, maybe it's 2.5, maybe it's 2, I don't know. But, I mean, I think the recommendation of some type of floor, I think, is prudent. But any given year, sure, they can go below it. If there's good, you know, that's going to happen. That's normal fluctuation. And, you know, as Bill Mullen used to say when he was on the Finance Committee, every year is like a snowflake. Every year is unique. Every year is different. We know that. We've seen that. We deal with that as we have to. So I don't know what the percentage would be, total budget. You know, I mean, we could probably come up with some number there, but, you know, again, it's a recommendation.
Ms. Anderson?
The 3 to 5, I think it's 3 to 5%. Our recommendation for the levels for the free cash for the town were based on best practices from a number of different organizations. I have not looked into what those best practice recommendations are for schools, so that's one direction to come at it from. Another one is that we have recently lived through extraordinary times with presumably some, I mean, we know there have been some emergency expenses, so that gives us an opportunity to put some real world data into coming up with what we think is a floor based on actual needs. So I think it's actually a good discussion to have, to just educate ourselves about at what level do we get concerned, because there is going to be borrowing coming up, dealing with Conant, and interest rates have gotten rather bad for borrowing right now. So it's going to be a real big change than what we saw for building the twin school.
Mr. Wellinghofer, Mr. Majors? No comment? Because we have members in the audience who may have an opinion or may be able to help the Finance Committee understand whether or not such a policy or advice in such regard may or may not be helpful, I welcome you to make any comments or ask any questions if you have any. Not obliged, but you've sat this long.
I needed to stand up, so thank you. No, I think, you know, as I think about reserves policies, by the way, I'm Peter Light, the superintendent of schools. I think I've met most of you, but figured I would say it anyway. I think of a couple different reasons, and I heard interest rates certainly is one, and the ability to borrow funds and maintain a positive bond rating. That's certainly one outcome we want, but I think managing risk is also another, you know, really probably the more immediate outcome that we all look at. And, you know, I would just encourage Finance Committee to understand that there are multiple buckets of reserves that a school district maintains. It's not just excess and deficiency. We tend to think of that because it's probably the most flexible of those. But there are additional reserves that also mitigate significant areas of risk. One is always in capital, that you could have significant capital expenses that could come up in a given year that exceed what you had budgeted. We do maintain a capital stabilization fund of about $1 million in addition to excess and deficiency. And then similarly, special education out of district tuition costs are another significant area of fluctuation that can change quickly. And we also maintain a circuit breaker reserve that all districts have, which has, several $1 million in it. And we typically budget circuit breaker to use just about what we take in a given year from the state. So it's kind of an in and out model generally. But we do maintain, about $3.5 million in circuit breaker reserves in a given year. So, there are multiple buckets of reserves that we want to think about. Some of them are targeted use, stabilization and circuit breaker, but those also speak to some of the, bigger risks, I think, that a district has at any given moment. So.
Do you mind if I ask you a question while you're here, Mr. Light?
Sure.
Which is, do you see a benefit in the FinCom coming up with a specific policy and using that as a recommendation to either yourself or to the school committee and asking you or asking the school committee to follow that? Or do you feel it's not a recommendation that serves a purpose for the school district or the school committee?
I think, we set a policy with the school committee a few years ago, and I think, in hindsight, I think we set a 4% target roughly, or a range of 4 to 4.5% in excess and deficiency. And I think what we're finding is times can fluctuate and needs fluctuate over time. I think, our school committee has done a lot to be very transparent with Finance Committee. Over the last several years, at least since I've been here, we try and visit regularly, be transparent about budget processes, strains on the budget. And I think, if the Finance Committee had a concern that somehow school committee wasn't necessarily, maintaining that relationship or wasn't, receiving feedback, I could see maybe where the Finance Committee would want to do that. But, I also take a perspective that I think the relationship between school committee and Finance Committee has been very strong. And I think the school committee has been very responsive to taking in feedback from Finance Committee members and understanding, the fiscal constraints of the town. And that's certainly, forefront on our mind as we're developing this budget. I think what we're also trying to do is understanding that for every decision, there's some, intended consequences and unintended consequences. And I think, this year in particular, where we're up against a very, very constrained budget and looking at, what we're projecting as a multi-million-dollar deficit, we are also thinking about how we can maintain educational services at a level that the community comes to expect, and simultaneously balance all of the needs financially of a long-term sustainable education. So, I think, my personal take is right now, I don't know if there's necessarily added value to it, because I think school committee has been, very receptive to, concerns from the Finance Committee. But maybe if at some point we feel that relationship hasn't been maintained, I could see why the Finance Committee might want to adopt something like that.
I appreciate that opinion.
Quick question, if I may.
If he'll answer it.
I fully understand E&D. I also understand the capital stabilization budget, and considering just how much capital goes on in a given year, $1 million is not it's not an unreasonable thing to have in reserves. The special education circuit breaker fund, that's not fungible. You can't, that's the question. Is that fungible? Are you able to take that money and cover other expenses as needed?
You cannot use that for other expenses outside of out-of-district tuitions.
Okay, so that's not a form of reserves. That's not something that you can help use to, if you're $250,000 shy in another section, you can't just say, well, let's take it out of the circuit breaker reserve. Right?
Yeah, but I appreciate that aspect of it. However, when I think of risks to a school district and costs that can escalate fast beyond, anyone's control. If you have, one student move into a school district, every student we have are obligated to provide the appropriate level of education services a student has. But based on the needs of the student, those costs can, come in the student is out of district, anywhere between $80,000 and possibly several $100,000 per year. That is the fastest liability a school district's going to incur, short of a capital expense, that $1 million roof or something like that. So because circuit breaker can be applied to out-of-district tuition costs in a flexible manner, it actually does mitigate risk at a very, very strong level, I think.
Because that is one of your largest risks. Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks for sharing your comments.
All
Really
right,
appreciate it.
thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and thanks
Always
for
appreciate
attending
it.
tonight. So other comments from the Finance Committee about this subject, and should we include this again on another agenda, or?
Well, I believe we've beaten this to death.
Okay, great. I would concur. All right. So with that, let's move on to, take care. We do have the joint multi-board meeting minutes that we can vote to approve tonight, if we'd like. Did all of you have a chance to look those over? I'm getting a shaking head there. How about you, Mr. Majors? Did you look at the multi-board meeting minutes? And no. Okay, so we won't be voting on those tonight. We'll do that at another meeting. Liaison reports, anyone? Mr. Borden.
So state funded the CPA trust fund. Acton's share is $367,832. So we collected in CPA surcharge. I actually have that right here. Give me 1 second. Collected $1,213,347. So it gives us a 30.3% match reimbursement. So a 5% reimbursement is 30.3%. So you're getting almost a 30 budget of the CPA on that. So looking at that, I mean, we had some discussion a while back. Should they go to a higher percentage, go to the full 3%? I don't think there's a need. And we had that discussion with CPA when they were in here last time. I still strongly feel we should leave it where it is. No need to raise it. And by having a lower, it is a tax on the citizens. I'll leave it at that. But I feel that if you have a lot of money, then they tend to green light projects versus if you don't have as much money, you're going to get stronger applicants, stronger applications for projects, and they have to be more due diligence to do it and more stringent and do more analysis and more in-depth stuff like that. So I feel that I wouldn't support any raise of the surcharge in the future. You can see we're getting $300,000, so it's a lot of money.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. On that comment, I will say that Bill Aylesbury reached out to me again to find out if any of the FinCom members had had a chance to look at his projections and if they had any comments. So I'm just going to throw that out there. If you would like those sent to you again or wanted to, he had asked for, it was sent as a slide deck. It wasn't an Excel spreadsheet. So if anybody wants to look at that, give him any feedback or comments, he was welcoming any feedback that anybody wanted to give him from the Finance Committee.
You want to send that back out again to the committee?
I could send that again.
Thank you.
Sure. Other liaison reports. Last night, the Select Board met. Probably the two most interesting items to come out of that last night were sewer-related. They discussed two hookups. One was for the new housing project across Route 2, which was voted to be hooked up, and most of that is going to be funded with new state grant money, which is, I think, promised but not specifically assigned as of yet. And the other one was for the Parker Street apartments, and I seem to recall that was about 65 units that was voted to hook up to the sewer district. 76 units, sorry. Aside from that, I don't think I'm missing anything pertinent from last night, am I, Mr. Martin? So. Okay, Tara. What's your one thing? Thank you. Okay. And future meeting dates. So as you all know, our 2 meetings in December are going to be coincidental with the select board for the SIP presentation and then the budget presentation. And aside from that, if any of you has a strong opinion that we should meet outside of that, let me know. Otherwise, we'll meet again in January.
The budget presentation, is that the new budget Saturday?
Yeah, I believe so. Is that right?
And do you need questions into you by?
So that's the one, that's the later date. So that date is 19th. So I would say if you have questions for the budgetary entities, we should probably get those collated and off to the town manager. I would think at least a week in advance, so maybe by the 12th. Is that unreasonable? That's a good question. When will the budget be published? Did John say? Okay, I don't,
So one of those 2 meetings in December?
December 5th will be a select board meeting where Mr. Mangiarotti will, yep, and the new capital improvement plan will be presented, and then on the 19th will be the entire town budget.
What time is that, 7:30?
Those meetings generally start at 7 o'clock, but I am not going to know exactly when we should be expected until the select board gets a little closer and puts them in their agenda. The other one is the 19th, yep. So I'd say if you have questions on the budget process, let's try to get those in by the 12th of December so that we can collate them and get them off to Mr. Mangiarotti. Or, so a lot of those questions are pending whether we have the budget to look at, right? So if you have questions you know in advance, otherwise we might have to just wait until we have the budget in hand. Okay. With that, I will accept a motion to adjourn from.
So moved.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And abstentions. Thank you very much.